This video is on factoring quadratics, but I'm going to specifically be looking at factoring by grouping. This is when we have four terms and we want to group sets of two terms. So we're going to group sets of terms, of two terms, and factor GCFs. Factor their GCFs. So I'm going to use what's called the box method. It just keeps it nice and organized. So the only thing we really have to know when we're factoring by grouping, other than, yes, you still have to do your GCF, you might have to factor even further after you've done the grouping, but when you are actually grouping them together, when you're putting them into the box, notice that there are four terms and there are four boxes. So you want to put the terms inside the boxes, but there's a specific location. The first box, this first box, should always have a common letter to the box right beside it and underneath it. So first box, so if I'm looking at these, if I want to write this out, if I'm looking at these boxes, these boxes right here should have a common letter. And these boxes right here should also have a common letter. They should have common letters. So the first term is generally going to be your largest exponent, the one that has the most letters or the highest exponents. So if we look at this first one, we have x squared. I have two other terms that do have the same letter, even though we have an x and also an x here. If we had a 2y, we only have one other term that has a y in it. So I definitely want to make sure that this first box will have a letter in common to the second box and the third box. So I can actually put the x squared in this first one because they do share a common letter. So we want to make sure we find our GCF, as always. The smallest number in here in all of them is 1. So that means that our GCF so far is 1. They all have letters, but we have to make sure it's common to all of them. So I have x, 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 no x. So I know my GCF cannot have an x with it. Then y's. So I don't have a y in here, so I know automatically my GCF cannot have a y. And this is it. Our GCF is just 1, and that's okay. So now we want to, because there's four terms, now we want to try and group them. So I'm going to put my terms inside the four boxes. My first term is going to be x squared. Now on this box, I want to make sure that I have a letter in common, so I can use my positive 2x. On this box, I need to make sure it has a common letter, so I can use my positive xy. And then my last term, it doesn't matter if it has a letter in common with the other ones, it's just you put that last term in here, so that's a positive 2y. So now what we do is we've grouped them together. We have sets of two terms. We have two terms in this row, two terms in this row, two terms in this column, two terms in this column. So we really have four sets. And now we're just going to factor out the GCFs. So we're going to do the GCFs of the rows and of the columns. Now I will always factor out my GCFs to the left-hand side and to the top. The main reason is because of the signs that go along with these first three. These first three are the most important ones because we have to look at the signs on it, and also they have to have the common letters. So the GCFs I'm going to have is, on this first row, I look for my number. GCF would only be a 1. And then I have letters. So I have x and x. My smallest exponent is 1. So my GCF is a positive x to the first. Because this first term is positive, I know my GCF is positive. If I go to the second row, I have a positive xy, so I know my first term, or my GCF, will be a positive. Because we are going to be writing them into factored form, I do want to make sure that my second one that I do has a sign on it. So I didn't have to put the positive up here, but I do have to make sure I put a plus sign down here. So my GCF, my number, is again only a 1. So you always put a number down, even if the GCF is just 1, that's perfectly fine. And then I look for letters. These both actually have a Y in it, so I know my GCF will be a Y. I'm not factoring my GCF out, I'm just finding the GCF, actually. So now we're going to do the column. So I'm going to go up. So again, I look at my sign, I have a positive, but it's the first one, so I don't actually have to put the positive sign. My number is, I have 1, so my number's GCF is 1. And then these both have an X with it, which again is supposed to happen because they have to share a letter. So my GCF for this one would be 1X. On the second column, again, since it's the second one, I have to put a sign. My sign up here is a positive, so I can put a positive up here. The common number, the greatest common number, is actually 2. And then they do not share a common letter, and that's fine. So I just have a 2 here. Now, the way we write our answer is we're going to write, this is going to be our first factor, this is going to be our second factor. Or we can say this is our first factor, this is our second factor. Before I write them in my answer, I will have 2 terms left over inside of parentheses. I look to see, is it going to be a difference of squares? 1x is not a perfect square, so I know that this will be part of my answer. Come down here, 1x is not a perfect square, so again, I know this will automatically be part of my answer. So our answer is written as 1x plus 2, parentheses, because I just took the top. Then I'm going to take the bottom in order. So 1x plus 1y. That's my second set of parentheses. Or again, you can say it as 1x plus 1y times 1x plus 2. Either one is fine. So this is our final answer. On the second one, again, we have 4 terms. We still want to find our GCF no matter what. So the smallest number on here, we have 4, 2, 4, 2. The smallest number is 2. All of these terms can be divided by 2, so I know I'm going to have a GCF of 2. Now I look for letters. I have an A. I don't have an A, so A is not our GCF. I have an X, X, no X, so X is not our GCF. And it doesn't matter about the rest of them, honestly, even though there's a Y over here. This one does not have a Y, so if I look at my first one for the letters, if there are other letters in the problem, but I don't have it on the first one, I don't even have to look at it. So I have A and X, and that's it. That's the only ones that could potentially be part of the GCF. But because I don't have an A in the next one, I don't have an X in the back, I know my GCF is just 2. So let's rewrite this problem with the 2 as the GCF. So I'm going to have 2 parentheses. We're going to divide everything by 2. We're left with 2ax squared plus just 1bx squared minus 2ay squared and minus 1by squared. I got a little close to the boxes, so when I write this, when I do my factors out here, make sure I'm doing them in the same color. They're going to be pink, so just when you're reading that, just be a little careful. Now that I factor out the GCF, I still have 4 terms. I want to put them in the boxes. I look at my first term, which is 2ax squared. If I put that in the first one, that has the most letters and it has common letters, so hopefully it will share something with the other ones. 2ax squared. Now my next one is bx squared. That does share a letter with here. It has the x, so I can put the positive bx squared. The next one is negative 2ay squared. That does share a letter. It shares the a, so I can put that in this term down here, in this third box. So negative 2ay squared. And then my last one is just negative by squared. And now we're going to factor the GCFs of the rows and the columns. GCF of 2 and 1 would be 1. These both share the letter x, and they actually have x squared and x squared, so my GCF would be x squared as well. On my second row, because my second row I have to have my sign, the sign on the beginning is negative, so I need to make sure that my sign out here is negative. The GCF of these, it's a 1 from the numbers. A is not in the other one. Y squared is in the second one, so they share y squared. And they do not share B. So my GCF is negative 1y squared. For the column, this top one is going to be positive because my first sign is positive. They both share a 2. So I don't put a negative 2 because the first sign is positive. Then they both share the letter A. And they do not share anything else. It doesn't matter if they share something squared. That does not matter. That is attached to the x, and that squared is attached to the y. So you cannot say, oh, they share a square. The second column, I have to put a sign. The first term is positive, so I put a plus. They share the letter B, and they do not share anything else. So I have factored their GCFs. And now we have to look to see if anything else can factor. So for the first part, the 2a plus b, is 2 terms. 2a is not a perfect square. Therefore, I know I'm going to have the 2a plus b in my final answer. So I can go ahead and put the GCF of 2, parentheses, 2a plus b has to be part of my answer because that cannot factor further. Then I look at the side. 1x squared. That is a perfect square, so I have to look at the other one. I have to have both perfect squares and a subtraction sign. Then I have 1y squared. That is also a perfect square, and it is a subtraction sign, so actually this column has to factor further. So I'm going to put this off to the side, saying that I have x squared minus y squared. This can factor further, which I need to do before I write it in my answer. These are a difference of squares, so the square root of x squared is x, the square root of y squared is y, and I put x minus y as well. That's as far as it'll go because now neither of these are perfect squares. Now this actually goes on to my answer, so I can put, for the rest of this, is x plus y and then x minus y. Now we have our answer because no more of these are a difference of squares, and we have no other common factors. So when you do grouping, you have to make sure that your factors cannot factor further. This one could, so just be very careful about that. On this last one for grouping, again, we're going to find our GCF. The smallest number is 2. 6 can be divided by 2. 2 can be divided by 2. 3 cannot be divided by 2. So GCF is just going to be a 1. Because then the only multiples of 2, not multiples, factors of 2 are 1 and 2. GCF has to be 1. Now we look at our letters. I can actually only focus on the A and the X. So I have an A, no A. So A is not in here. X, no X. So X is not in here. Our GCF is 1. So it does not affect the problem. So now I start putting in my terms. So my 6ax, I'm going to put in the front, in the first one. My next one is negative 2b. That does not share a letter with ax, so I don't want to put the 2b in here. So I'm going to look at another one. That one might have to, I'm going to wait for that one. I'm going to go to this one, negative 3a. That does share a letter, so I can put the negative 3a in here. Then my 4bx, if I put that one here, that has the letter x in it, so I can put that positive 4bx. So that negative 2b actually should go at the end. Now I can factor out, or I can figure out what their GCFs are. This first term is positive, so this is going to be positive. The smallest number is 3. 6 can be divided by 3, so my GCF so far has a 3. And they share that letter A. So my GCF will have 3A. On the second row, the first sign is positive, so I need to put that plus. The smallest number is 2, and they can both be divided by 2, so I know I have GCF of 2. And they do share the letter B, so I can put positive 2B. Now the column. So up here, the first number is positive. The smallest number is 4. 6 cannot be divided by 4, but it's 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. So the next number we will check would be 2. 6 can be divided by 2, so our GCF has a 2 in it. And they both share the letter X. So our GCF is 2X. On this last column, the first sign is negative, so I have to put that minus sign. Their GCF number, the smallest number is 2. 3 cannot be divided by 2, so it would be 1 times 2, so the GCF is negative 1 right now. And they do not share a letter, so our GCF is negative 1. Now we look to see, because we have 2 terms on each side, if anything else can factor before we write our answer. So 2x minus 1. 2x is not a perfect square, so we know that our answer will have 2x in it. 2x minus 1. That is fine. Now on this side, 3a and 2b, 3a is also not a perfect square. Therefore, this 3a plus 2b has to be part of our answer. There are other ways to group problems instead of just in a box, but the boxes kind of keep them more organized, and you can see the signs and you can easily see which ones you're looking for. And then because you're pulling them out to the top and to the left, you automatically have your factors. So I mean, there are other ways, it's just however it makes more sense to you. So this is factoring by grouping.